I'm
going to go ahead and call to order the June 7th meeting of the school board. Ask you all please rise for pledge allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everybody. Certainly want to applaud and congratulate both the students and staff for the phenomenal spring concert last week. Also loved having it out back on the new basketball court. I thought it made a great location for it. And appreciate superintendent and staff's last minute rush when the ground was too soft to have it in the usual spot, and came up with a great plan B. So great work, everybody, on that. Next we have approval of the minutes from May 3rd. I will go ahead and make a motion we approve as presented.
Looking for a motion? I'll make the motion.
Second?
That.
I'll second it. All in favor?
So.
Those are approved. We are going to remove item 9.2 from the published agenda. Those are the only adjustments that I'm aware of at this point. That brings us to public comment. Anybody from the public wish to address the board on anything? Seeing none. Brings us to committee reports. Policy committee. I'm not sure we have anything other than continuing to.
We have some things that are coming up later, and
Yep.
Part of it is in response to what MSMA suggested policies, and so part of the discussion will be the need or lack of need to have take a policy from 2 pages to 10, when I think ours does very well the way it is.
Anything from the technology committee tonight?
There's nothing from the technology committee today.
Facilities committee.
Alright, so the facilities committee would just like to report that we have had our transition in our cleaning company since our last board meeting. In mid-May, we switched from Benchmark Cleaning to BSC, and we could not be more pleased with the support for the transition from both Benchmark and BSC. It was a nice exit and a great entrance in. We have a day porter from BSC who has quickly become part of our school. He's hardworking, he's detail-oriented. It's been a really nice fit. Currently, our evening custodian is still in the process of being determined. I think given the change at the end of the year, that's been a little harder to fill, but they're covering it by having one of their site managers here to learn the building and make sure that everything is running. And we will be transitioning to getting ready for summer maintenance anyway, and be able to start the year with a new plan. But we're really pleased with the change, and I just wanted the board to know that it's gone well. And it was really from both sides. Benchmark was really kind with the transition, and BSC's been great coming in.
Excellent. Thank you.
So basically starting early worked out well for everyone.
I think it really did. I mean, it's been, it's causes an adjustment at a time of year that is a hard time of year to have time to make adjustments. But what it will do for the summer maintenance cycle is that they're going to know the building, they're going to know the rooms, they'll know the staff. It's just going to make that process much easier rather than being late in the process coming in July and getting started. I think it did make sense.
The finance committee, obviously everyone was there, so we did have a successful town meeting. All said and done, the final budget was approved by a vote of 29 to 4. So we certainly thank the town for their continued support. Do remind everybody that we do still need to pass the budget at referendum, and that is scheduled for June 13th.
Which is Tuesday?
Next Tuesday. Yeah. So please take a few minutes, get out and vote. There's both the budget and the permission to use any additional state funds if those come through. Those both will be on the ballot, and there's some other referendum questions on the ballot as well. So, Firehouse.
8 to 8.
8 to 8 on the 13th. And can we also get that reminder in the newsletter? I think I've seen it a couple times already. Payroll warrants. I reviewed and signed payroll on the 2nd, the 15th, and the 30th of May. And AP warrants, Dennis reviewed on the 4th and the 19th. And I reviewed on the 5th and also on the 19th and signed those. So checks for me. Brings us to item 8, superintendent's report.
Okay, beginning first with our financial report. We are in solid shape for this time of year with our school budget. With 8% left of the year, there's 24.19% of our budget remaining. Once you remove the carry forward that we've allocated to the next year's budget, there's 16.3% of the budget remaining. And if you then further pull out the reserve funds that were voted on at town meeting, then there's 13.9% of our budget remaining. So I'm feeling very good about how it's all tracking and how we're continuing to do with both budgeting and monitoring our spending. If there are any questions about the financial report, I'm happy to answer questions. Otherwise, I have nothing more to report.
Just as a general question, do you feel like it's a stretch to hit those numbers, or like, are you making? Is it comfortable?
Right now, it's feeling exactly right.
Okay.
If you looked at the line by line items, because we do budget zero based, like it's, as I'm doing the final AP warrants,
Yeah.
we are down to zero
Yeah.
because there are really lots of those lines are for one specific item.
Okay.
And so it just depends on the time frame of, when those bills come in.
Yeah.
We have hit the place where I've received a few bills that are for next year that I've held till July because I don't have those funds to be able to
Yeah.
pay them now. That wasn't the case last year, but now that we're a little bit further into our, running our school district, those are the decisions and opportunities that we
Sure.
can make. Are they this fiscal year or next fiscal year? But I do feel like our budget is still sort of exactly right.
Okay, great.
Let me point out that the Financial Advisory Committee, for want of a better term, made a strong case that in case a miracle happens and we do get more state funds, there's a big push that should go essentially back into the town's coffers to offset the citizen tax burden. So I just wanted to mention it without other comment. That was very much made at the town meeting.
Thank you. Okay, next within the superintendent's report, I know that you all received this letter in your email from MSBA, but if you look at the cover sheet of the email, the last paragraph says, "We are asking school boards across the state to vote to support this letter at their next board meeting and share it with their local legislators." So, knowing that you have received it and reviewed it ahead of time, I'm going to ask the chairman to comment on this.
Yeah, I appreciate getting it in advance so we don't have to read it all here right now. Does the board wish to take any action based on the recommendation from MSMA? Do we want to endorse this letter, and or do we want to create our own letter indicating our support and forward it on to our state rep and state senator?
Nobody else wants to speak. To say I read the letter, and the letter made me somewhat uneasy. And the reason for that is, if I read some of the accompanying document, or actually supplemental documentation, the typical superintendent in Maine makes roughly twice the salary of the governor. And while you can argue that the governor may or may not be underpaid, and in fact he wants to double the salary once he's out of office, and they can actually do that, it just made me uncomfortable. I don't care what the percentage is, and I know there are exceptions. It's some kind of a bell-shaped curve, I'm sure, as for the remuneration of superintendents, depending on the size of the school district that's being covered, but I, for one, am not prepared to vote, whatever anyone else does, I'm not prepared to vote in favor of the letter, period.
Other
think-
thoughts?
I think we're also in a unique situation,
Yes.
and that's, you know, what are we lending our support to was something that, in essence, doesn't,
Doesn't really apply. if you
Right.
want, Yeah,
yeah. That's my 2 cents.
yeah, no,
Certainly, I respect those viewpoints. My frustration, I guess, is the constant barrage of criticism that superintendents, teachers, support staff take in the political arena. And I think an opportunity to stand up and defend the hard work they do is something we should seriously consider. The state mandated requirements and certifications for superintendents are far superior to any state mandated requirements for a governor, any governor. And I believe the governor has already vetoed on a couple of occasions a pay raise because people recognize that salary is artificially low. So I don't think it's necessarily fair or accurate to compare anybody's superintendent's salary to that of the governor.
I should probably weigh in as well, since the odd man out. I hear i- the concerns that that were raised. I kind of side with the that salary itself isn't really a good indicator of the work and the additions that a superintendent adds, you know, to the entire education process. And while our situation is on the more unique side, one of the 5 combined positions statewide, I think it goes beyond self-interest and into the interest of the entire educational system for the state. And in those regards, I tend to find myself supporting the letter because of the statewide issues surrounding school administration and the cuts proposed by the governor. I guess that's not really the right way to put it, but what is the term I'm looking for? Anyway, the funding levels. Thank you. That the funding levels, you know, need to be appropriate to the position. I mean, not to the health of education statewide. Sorry, I'm trying to think as I go here. So I'm fairly well stuttering right now. In that case, I would lend my support to the letter for those reasons.
Let me add one more point, which is, because the letter is really aimed at administrative salaries.
Yeah.
You know, it's not about teaching and whatever. But if you look at our locale, Brunswick, Bath, et cetera, and that in particular, what do you see in school budgets? They are reducing staff. Nobody says that we're going to do something to reduce the level of administrators or anything else. It's we're going to cut out this aide and this tech, and we're not going to fund this teacher. And I agree that, I mean, Brunswick is having some real difficulties right now, and they're not the only ones. And while I agree that the state should support education more than they are doing, I don't have a disagreement with the basic premise, which is that we ought, no matter what the percentages are, that you never really see, we're gonna have fewer administrators out there in let's say a school district that covers 12 schools. I don't see that we're gonna cut somebody or that we're gonna do something. It's always fewer teachers, fewer special programs for the kids. And I don't see that, I support more educational support from the state, but I think the letter doesn't address that. It's kind of addressing the wrong part of the beast. At least that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think we can defend the work that superintendents and educators and administrators do, maybe not such in a broad political arena, maybe. I mean, I know this packs a punch, but I'm not a fan.
For me, here's what it comes down to. All of the positions need to be filled at the appropriate staffing levels to do the job.
Yeah.
If you're talking about cutting a teacher and that leaves the students short, well, then you're talking about the wrong solution, to the problem that you've got. What this letter is doing is objecting to removing all administration funding support from the state. That's what the proposal was, to remove the administration support funding from the state and place it squarely back into communities with no assistance. That's really my reading of what his proposal is. And I don't think that, again, is an appropriate response, to a problem. If administrative staffing is at the appropriate level, for the job descriptions, then it doesn't make sense to cut, and taking money away doesn't make sense either, because it's at the appropriate level. If there are too many administrators, so that, inefficiencies are there, then absolutely you should match the level of work with the level of staffing. But that's not what this is about. This is about the policy of removing all of the school administrative funding aid that the state was providing.
Well, I hate to speak for the governor, because I'm certainly not qualified to do it, and won't get into personalities either. But I suspect that what the governor wants is to put control over that aspect into the local arena. So people who support by their taxes RSU 1 should have a say in the level of administration. Now, the problem, I think, is that it seems at least that the state is not doing anything to supplement non-administrative requirements, and that it certainly should be easy enough for the state to say, well, we're going to make these funds available, but none of it can go into administration. And that would seem to be a reasonable approach to the whole thing, rather than just cut something that the schools have relied on traditionally and say, okay, we're going to shift this, we're going to give you this much, and you're going to have to come up with the rest. If you're happy with the level of administration, then you'll be happy to make up for it. If you think that there's too much overhead in that area, then you need to seriously have somebody on your school boards make cuts. I mean, that's kind of how I look at it.
But isn't the local community ultimately responsible for the overall budget already? And the administration of their school is part of that budget as it stands.
You know,
This is
because
just the state supplementing,
because
because
the school budget is paid for by the towns, essentially, or by the
Right,
governing bodies.
and the school administration is part of
And-
that budget.
Right now, we're seeing that there is some real pushback between some of the, I think Brunswick is one in particular, between the town budget and the school budget. And that the town is asking the school to cut more than $500,000, as I recall. But they're gonna increase their budget by $1 million. And so there's some conflict there, and that will eventually get resolved. But I think the real problem is that we're looking at what appears to be a significant reduction in state aid to education. And if somebody wanted to write a letter stressing that, and in different terms, I certainly would support that. I just don't happen to like this letter,
I don't
period.
either.
Yeah.
May I comment?
Go ahead.
Sure.
I think that West Bath is in a uniquely different position
Yeah.
because we are one of the very few districts that has a combined administration, and we have one person doing the rules of many different types of administrators. And also, as a minimum receiver, we don't get the subsidy for administration anyway.
Yeah.
So this letter really is aimed towards those districts who've lost hundreds of thousands of dollars that they've used to fund other portions of education, and now to make their programs work, need to make cuts in other areas to be able to still meet all the state mandates. So I think everything that each of you are saying, you're all hitting on really important points. For me, this letter really comes down to what do we want for education in the state of Maine. And I think that West Bath has learned that having local control and a local school board and local decision-making at even this very small level of the West Bath SAU is important to this community. And that if you decide not to support this letter, I think that we should think about what parts do we want to support or write
Yeah.
that support our own philosophies of how education should be funded in Maine.
Yeah.
I think that's where I'm stuck on. It's not that I disagree with the subject matter. It's the way that it's put together that I
Yeah.
don't necessarily agree with. And I think also signing off on something that doesn't, I think if we could draft something that, applied to us and that we could speak to our experience of local control, that would be maybe more effective than signing on a blanket statement that doesn't really apply to us. We couldn't speak to in the best way that we could demonstrate.
Well, Chief?
I think we're going to probably have to leave this at a,
I certainly have not heard a motion to
On the
take action
table.
one way or the other. I'm disappointed by that. I'm disappointed that the governor and his plan wants to take away the funding without the mandate and further burden local taxpayers without reducing the legal requirements that we have some of these administrators in place, without reducing the workload that is the state mandates on these administrators, without streamlining their reporting system so that we're not working in 5 different systems to report numbers, some of which are duplicates of what is already reported. I'm disappointed. Moving on. 8.3, district updates.
So we don't want to make a motion either way.
I don't hear any motions at all.
If there were a motion, it's probably not gonna pass anyway.
yeah, my feeling is that either motion would be gridlocked,
Yeah.
so.
There's no point
Neither
in it.
motion is,
Well, gridlock would lead to defeat.
yeah, right,
Don't see
for
a point.
whichever direction the motion is
Like
made,
the
is what I'm
absence of a
saying.
motion is,
Okay. So for district updates, we're going to keep it simple because nothing is simple this time of year. So we'll do this part simple. And that is that there are 3 events that I would like to have on your calendars coming right up. First is our 7th annual Community Celebration of Learning. That's Wednesday, June 14th at 3 o'clock. And that takes place right here. It's the big culminating event for all of our students for this semester anyway. But for 5th grade, it's for the course of the whole school year. On the flip side of your invitation for the Celebration of Learning, you will see the invitation for the Discovery Boat Building launch, which is the 5th grade's launch of their skiffs, and a ceremony that is on the same day at 4:30, and that will take place at Sawyer Park Boat Launch in Brunswick. So that's just across the bridge up on the left. So there will be the launch and the ceremony surrounding that. And then on the 19th, Monday, June 19th, we will have our volunteer coffee and crew. And so coffee will begin here in the library at 8:15, and then we will have a school-wide crew meeting. They'll be dedicated to our volunteers beginning at 8:40. And you all, as very important volunteers to the West Bath School, are invited to attend that event.
Will the shuttle also go to the boat launching?
The shuttle will not go to the boat launching because there's plenty of parking, but the shuttle will run back to the courthouse to drop people at their cars so that they can drive, and that way you're not locked into a particular time.
Next, we have 9.1, siblings of grandfathered school choice students.
Okay. So last month, we actually had this agenda on our item, this item on our agenda. I think I had it within the superintendent's update. And I wanted to just give you another update of the status of our siblings of our grandfathered school choice students. So you'll recall that last year, the board chair requested that I survey families to find out how many of our grandfathered children have siblings who would like to attend West Bath when their time came. Our withdrawal agreement only covered the current children who are at West Bath at the time of the withdrawal. It did not provide support for siblings, and the Dennis could probably comment on this, but the transition committees throughout the process talked about we would take that case by case, on a case by case basis when the time came. So the survey showed that there were 5 families who would like to have their children enter West Bath School when their time came. That would be 2 in next year's kindergarten, 2 the following year, and then 1 2 years after that is the way it's all spaced out. So there are 5 children at most who fall into this category. So last month, I let you know that through discussions with RSU1 superintendent, the RSU1 school board had decided that they were not going to, as a board, approve that the school choice siblings could attend West Bath School. And so what that meant for a process is that those families could apply for a superintendent's agreement, which would mean that both the RSU1 superintendent and I would have to agree to allow the children to come here. And it's a formal agreement that can happen with superintendents from all districts.
Mhm.
And that basically what that means is for that 1 year, they become West Bath students. And so if we were receiving subsidy, we'd receive subsidy for them. As minimum receivers, we don't, and, but it would allow them to continue to attend. So 2 families did go through that process and applied for superintendent's agreements. They were the 2 families who would have kindergarten students coming in for next year. And I approved both of those, but the RSU1 superintendent did not approve them. So then, the next step for that is that there can be an appeal of that decision to the Commissioner of Education. And in the recent past, all of the commissioners' appeals have ruled in favor of families, but we have had a period of time where there wasn't a commissioner. The governor was acting as the commissioner, and then we have a new commissioner as of a month ago. And one of the families heard back on Friday that their appeal was not approved. So there's one final step that families can take, and that is that they can appeal to the State Board of Education to overturn the commissioner. But I received an email from one of the 2 parents, who asked me, or said, I would also like to know if there's been any discussion from the West Bath School Board about paying for siblings that got caught up in the withdrawal. Are there any options that West Bath has in their control as the other side of the withdrawal to take care of the choice families who lost out in the process? And I thought that was an interesting question, because it appeared that if the 2 districts weren't able to come up with an agreement on their own, that the superintendent's agreement would take care of that. But since that didn't work, then it appeared the commissioner's appeal would take care of that. But I want to sort of turn that question over to you, knowing that we've had many conversations about how we feel about our school choice families and where they were caught up in the withdrawal process that had nothing to do with them, and the 5 siblings that remain out there. What options, if any, are there, or would you want to consider as a school board for these 5 children and their families?
So, when Emily shared that with me, I suggested we reach out to our attorney, see if it's even legally possible, first off. The feedback we got is, that they could come to West Bath School as tuition students, under our tuition, non-resident tuition policy. Not sure that would work in this scenario, because of the cost of the tuition. The attorney did also respond that we could add language to our tuition policy that would waive the tuition for these individuals, the siblings of grandfathered students, if the board chose. Not sure what the board's thoughts are on that, so let's have a discussion.
Well, just take one student at a time. Just, what are the costs involved? I mean, basically, I know pretty much what the cost of the school is, assuming that you don't have to add a section and et cetera. So the question, is there any other financial obligation other than accepting a student?
Every other provision in the tuition policy would still apply. So if there were additional costs to the school district, then we could elect not to accept that tuition. Is that fair?
I would think that we would still go through the tuition policy procedures, where there would still be the screening pieces that need to happen, which don't happen with the superintendent's agreement, but do happen with tuition, and that there'd have to be space, because otherwise we'd have to be adding another section. And we've had the conversation all along the way, though, that in a situation where the student does not require additional expenses, that there's virtually no cost, even though there's supplies and things along those lines. But it's more of thinking about a bus traveling down the highway half full, adding another student to that bus makes things more efficient.
You were involved in all that, and
I was.
you want to weigh in, or be the odd man out again?
We tried hard to iron it out at that point, knowing that there would be these children coming along. But in the interests of getting the rest of the agreement done, had to put that off to the side to deal with when it arose. I had hoped that that these children would have been able to be handled with a superintendent's agreement initially. And we also weren't 100% sure of what the level of involvement would be, how many children we were talking about at the time, or how open-ended it would be. If, say, a child that had a particularly large gap between siblings, would come along in 10 years. I mean, that's not unheard of. So we didn't have a good idea. My personal feeling is that as long as there aren't any exceptional circumstances, the individual cost is almost negligible.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see why we can't. I would want to be comfortable with what precedent that set, though. If we're just carving out, because these children were caught in this grandfathered situation, that it doesn't lock us into some other unforeseen precedent that we might not want to be in.
It sounds like the way to address that is to amend the private tuition student, let's just call it JFAB policy, to set limits as to time limits and be fairly specific that that this section, new section, applies to siblings of students currently enrolled.
Well, students that were currently enrolled at the time of withdrawal, because,
Well,
you know, that's 2
Yeah.
years worth of
Yeah.
siblings that, yeah.
We do have some draft language from the attorney that we could modify that policy. Frankly, it's why it's on the agenda.
But as separate agenda items, not
Right.
to assume that you would rule one way or another,
Right.
but just to give us the option of acting if we chose to.
I would also hope, well, actually, does it make any sense whatsoever to create these 5 exceptions and under whatever language, and just do that, or to ask that the families go through the various appeal processes before we make the exceptions?
I looked at some other policies, similar to this type of situation. There's nothing about withdrawal agreements, but there are things around employees and having their children come to school if they live out of district. And the wording around those policies was that you first attempt a superintendent's agreement. It doesn't talk about going the appeals process, but I think going through the superintendent's first is certainly the appropriate step. And of course, you can decide however you want that to go, but that would not be unheard of for that to be.
Yeah.
So that this would be like the last resort,
Yes.
not the first step.
Yeah. All right.
Although-
Because you want to encourage them to go through the normal process, because there probably is some benefit to us through a superintendent's agreement, I would guess. And we don't want to say, well, the last resort is we'll accept you no matter what, so, you know, we're not going to go through the process. But, yeah, I'm certainly in favor of finding a way, basically, to allow those particular students that have fallen in this funny gap
So-
to attend school here.
So the next question is, these 2 students don't put us over class size limits for next year?
They would not because of the size of our kindergarten. We were scheduled to have 2 kindergartens.
Right, okay. I haven't read the draft language yet, but does it address a situation where we had 2 students but 1 spot without having to split classes?
It,
Our
This-
biggest
this-
concern,
It does not.
our biggest concern originally was, seeing the numbers of students that were in, you know, from the RSU in the classes, that we might get an influx of 5 or 6 children in one grade and not be able to accommodate all of that without splitting classes, which does incur, you know, a whole nother teacher and room availability and all
Yeah,
that.
I think that
And I
is
think-
actually covered in the current
tuition
policy, and
policy.
since you're
Policy,
talking
yeah.
about modifying that,
It is, except that we're talking about a block of children, not individuals really. Right, for a particular year group, because these are a special category of student in this particular case. So if you got 4 students, and I know we're only talking about 5 total right now, if we're carving out the specific exception for those 5, then the precedent would be if another one came along, you know, 2 years later, you know, they would have grounds to say, well, you did it for these other 5.
unless our wording was different within the policy.
Well, even then, they would still be able, you know, have grounds to say, well, you did it for these other 5. I know the policy's written this way, but you changed it for them. You know what I'm saying? So we are kind of,
Arguably, that scenario already exists,
why?
because we've allowed the current students to attend.
But
Why
that-
do we not allow the siblings?
That wasn't because that was specific language in the separation, not an exception to that language. And what we're talking about right here is a school board policy that is an exception to the original agreement.
Okay.
And so I'm not against that. I'm just saying, keep in mind that type of a thing could happen. I see a hand up.
Let me just see if there's any other board thoughts before we go to the public.
Didn't we say though that that would just be an addition and all the other pieces of the policy would be followed?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The only part that's a bit of a hitch is if for some reason there were enough children in that block to
Yeah.
cause a split, now do you take a few and
Yeah.
say no? I mean, you know,
Yeah.
that's rough.
I just
Right.
think that kind of falls under the enrollment availability.
Yeah. I
It
think
does, we're
that's
just
true.
not talking about it would be like someone with quadruplets,
Yeah.
you know, what do
I think that if, let's say, the last student if it's one student, I
So-
suspect there are ways to handle it. If the last gasp were two students, that might be more difficult to accommodate. And
It's
if you
just a
get to
potential
that,
problem.
then you might, since they presumably would not be twins, but from different families, you might have to go with lottery again. Say, we can accept one student, not two.
Right.
And do it by lottery, so, pick a card, any card.
So if I go back to thinking about when we were part of the RSU with school choice, there was a process for until you ran out of room. That wasn't open for everybody, it
Right.
wasn't by lottery either, it was
Right.
really a first come, first serve, which isn't
Right.
necessarily the right thing, but I
And,
think
and siblings had preference under that policy as well.
in this situation with the 5 children who have been identified already, they're 5 different families.
Right. It's just, we know that it's not an issue for the next year, but then we have 2 more follow-on years that we don't have an understanding of, you know, what the class sizes are going to be.
Yeah.
If I can
Um,
base it on what my pre-K numbers look like, then there would be space.
Well, yes, but
that's a year away and,
but March
things
move-ins
change.
always change,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
We didn't
Well,
think
you
there was
can
gonna be.
always include the language that probably doesn't hold legal water, which is that this shall not be considered a precedent for any future admissions.
It's based upon the discretion of the board.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
Gonna go to public
Okay.
comment.
I just have a quick thing. I think that part of the grandfathering, maybe you could add a clause in it, like if their sibling is not currently in school in the local fall. I think part of grandfathering these kids in is to keep the families together. If in 6 years someone has a baby, they have a sibling, why should we have that person? There's no family continuity there. There's no compelling reason to allow that person into the school without going, requirements. Wilson does have triplets tomorrow.
Well, you can handle that just by putting well, this is valid until 2000 whatever,
A term limit.
a term limit, basically, yeah. But you're right, it's something we need to think about.
I wonder if we want to get, sort of a motion from the board about how we feel about this agenda item, and then if we are going to move forward, then we can talk about the regular language in the policy section.
Any other public comment before we do that? All right, seeing none, we'll back to the board.
I'd like to, can I start a motion on the item then?
I don't know, can you?
To draft language? I know we have,
I think the question
Potential
before us
language?
is, do we want to explore avenues
Accommodations
to
for those
make
students.
exceptions?
I
or-
make a
yeah,
motion to
accommodate those
explore
students.
avenues to accommodate students.
Grandfather, well, are they
Siblings of
my
grandfathered?
school
motion.
choice
Yes.
students?
you
Yes.
interrupted my motion.
I second. Maybe that.
Man,
Okay, I believe we have a motion to explore avenues to accommodate siblings of current school choice
Sure.
students, and it was seconded by Bob. I capture your
That's
motion
interrupted
correctly?
You did.
was interrupted.
You are. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Guess I'll vote in favor.
Opposed?
You get
Okay,
the
we are going to
drafting.
explore.
What's that?
You get the drafting.
That brings us to item 9.3, which is review board policies. The first one, 9.3.1, is policy JFAB, admission of non-resident private tuition students. And had the board chosen not to explore these avenues, we would have removed this from the agenda. But since we want to explore it, I'm not sure if the language presented to us goes far enough. Perhaps we can massage it to do so. the language,
Oh, my copies.
the language that we received from the attorney would be to amend the tuition payment section.
Thank you.
After the first paragraph, we would insert, notwithstanding the foregoing provisions, WBSAU reserves the right to waive the tuition for any non-resident student with a sibling who attended the West Bath School free of tuition as of July 1, 2015. Any thoughts on that language?
If you, I think if you have,
It's a little more open-ended than I had originally
you know,
envisioned. Because that includes that, you know, you were talking about the large gap situation. I mean, that as written would include any student who had ever been here. And I was envisioning students currently enrolled as of July or June 30th, 2015 or whatever. You know, just that class that
Oh.
got affected as opposed
who
to.
was enrolled at the West Bath School free of tuition as of June.
Could we
That's
put a
what you're
date
saying.
span? Like, starting July 1st, or whatever date.
You know what I
falls
mean?
on.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm not against this level of
Yeah.
open-endedness. I was just
Yeah.
in that mindset.
Oh, you're right. This
Because
would-
students that had already left the school by that point would technically not be grandfathered because they weren't here. It was just that body of 5 grades, technically 4 grades, because kindergarten at that point didn't have anybody, right?
As of July 1, they did. They were registered.
July
Began the
1.
kindergarten.
Oh, that kindergarten was the last one then?
No, so as of July, when there's July 1, we have our K-5 enrollment is in place for the next school year. So 15-16 enrollment. But you're right, there would be no school choice
Right.
families within it. Sorry, misunderstood your question.
would it,
But July 1st is the date we
Ju-
became a standalone district,
Right.
correct?
Right. And
It-
that kindergarten did have RSU students in it.
No.
No, that's what I'm saying. So it would just be those, the 4 grades that did, is what I was talking about. Them and their siblings, as opposed to anybody who would ever attend, you know,
Right.
a potential 6th grader who,
well, would it
I don't know.
help to say a sibling who was enrolled or was, at the West Bath
That's-
School, who was enrolled, not
I
just
think
who,
I'm
who
being,
attended, because you're right, that could be somebody who's in high school.
yeah,
who
I think I'm being
attended
too
that.
picky though. I mean, I don't have a problem with it as written. It's just more open than I thought what we were talking about.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, and that's because I collected sample language just in case we had this conversation. It doesn't mean that we're bound to this
Yeah.
Right.
language.
We
Yeah.
can certainly tighten it up if
Yeah.
that's the board's.
I just, you know, like I said, my concerns were binding, you know, a school board farther in advance than what we really think are thinking. And the other thing that occurred to me was if we do this, even if we're saying you have to try to get a superintendent's agreement first, the RSU would know that this is our policy.
Yeah.
So there's 0 chance of a superintendent's agreement happening.
Yeah, that was my
Really?
concern.
You know, if they know we're going to do this, then there's no incentive to even, you know, try to make an agreement or talk to the RSU about accommodating the children, because we're just gonna do it. Again, I'm not against it, I'm just saying that's, you
So
know,
why include that
I just wanna
language, is what
air
you're
the
saying?
ramifications that I see
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
in open rather than say I didn't think about that.
Yeah,
Um,
the RSU's reaction is something we need to consider.
mhm.
I like replacing attended with was enrolled. think that was a good suggestion.
Mhm.
Well, it's clear.
Although,
Yeah.
the problem is that was enroll, yeah,
Or even was attending. You know, that's really
Yeah.
splitting hairs.
I guess,
I don't think anybody was attending on July 1st.
I am
Yeah.
not a lawyer.
What if we change it to,
So,
who was enrolled at the West Bath School free of tuition on July 1, 2015?
That's good.
except for you could argue that the way the tuition reimbursement works is that they're not really free of tuition.
Right, yeah, I was gonna bring that up next.
I also wonder, I have a list of the students who were approved as grandfathered students. We have that, we know who those children are.
Mhm.
And that's written within the withdrawal agreement, and so we could reference that
I like
list.
that idea.
And we also have a list of the 5 children who, we've, are talking about that we've sort of approved who fall into this category.
Mhm. Yeah, technically, we can only approve the first 2 because we don't know about class size issues on the next 2 years.
Except for it would fall under the policy of how we would
Right.
look at tuition.
Technically, under the
right.
policy, the school board can't approve anybody.
I know they can, I'm just saying that it wouldn't automatically, but yeah. Actually, I like the idea of referencing that list rather than,
Of grandfathered students.
yeah, that, so their siblings, just because it's a very clean, cut and dried list that's already done. I don't know what you think about that.
Should we also take the free of tuition piece out of that?
Well, if you use that,
The specific one?
if you use that list, then the free of tuition clause doesn't have any meaning. It's gone. That's, so there's no, because technically, Emily's right, July 1st, none of them were free of tuition. Tuition was accommodated in kind
Right.
with
Yeah.
older students. It was,
Right. So regardless, that free of tuition piece needs to be struck because it's not accurate.
correct. Um, Yeah. Yeah, the only concern is if we go with that list, we don't accommodate anybody that had just left, but I don't know that that's,
But they're not grandfathered
they're
children.
technically not grandfathered
Right.
children, so, yeah.
Yeah, it's to our advantage to
I
have.
like the
have
idea of using that
waivers to be
list.
very specific and limited,
Yeah,
while still accommodating all the people that we know
Yeah.
fall into this.
Yeah.
So whatever that
Yeah,
appropriate language is.
I'm on board with using the specific list that was compiled during withdrawal as the baseline for siblings.
And I think it's appropriate that you keep in there that we reserve the right to waive tuition.
Right, meaning that
Those.
we have the.
We have to take action,
Right.
either the superintendent or the board.
Right,
has
we
take
still have to
action.
take action at
To
each
approve it.
year that's applicable.
Yeah, and that's perfectly reasonable.
What about this? Notwithstanding the foregoing provisions, the BBSAU reserves the right to waive the tuition of any non-resident student with a sibling identified through the West Bath SAU withdrawal process.
Mhm. It was a specific attachment in the withdrawal agreement, right? It was like a schedule.
Well, that was for staff.
Oh, okay.
But I have, no, there might be.
I don't have it with me.
I don't
but-
think that it's on the one that's on the website because it would be confidential.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
But it is, it exists, I have it, I
Yeah.
have it in my
okay,
possession.
okay.
yeah.
And-
Again, because of confidentiality,
Right.
I don't think that specifically has to be a part of that. Just have to reference that it exists and
Right.
where the
and
superintendent
if we
can
could just-
find it.
If we could just double back with Mark, or whoever our attorney is now.
But this was for Mark. We
Okay.
also could list it as, the siblings who were listed on the September 1st tuition bill from RSU one. Because that is a document that exists that has all of the grandfathered children named right there.
Right.
And then that, you know, it's something that would be easily accessible
Mhm.
through, I mean, anyone could ask for that because
Right.
it's.
As long as
something
it's
that goes to the board.
as long as it's a firm list that we can reference, you know, from that time, it's perfect.
If we do that, we essentially approve the change with the proviso that the attorney needs to look at the modified language. Or
Right.
subject to the approval of the attorney.
Yeah. Let him figure out the exact wording to reference the list of names. I know, we'd have to pay for him to do it.
It's not
but-
critical because we have a month, I mean, they're not starting school tomorrow. And we have meetings, so we can
Agree
approve
100%,
changes.
but we have some parents who are trying to determine where their kids are gonna go to school next year, and if we tell them they have to wait till mid-July,
Yeah.
that may cause them to explore other
Well,
options.
but
Well,
we've
he's saying we
already,
can approve the intent of the language.
Yeah.
But get the final legal language to approve in July, and we can still approve taking action based on our understanding of the language?
And we also know from what the attorney said, that there's no reason that it can't happen. You know, the
Right.
documentation you have in front of you
Right.
cites all of.
You know what I'm
the-
saying? That we can approve it, but the final language to cover what we're approving, I don't know.
Yeah, I think perhaps the better approach would be to table this for now. And we already have the recorded vote of wanting to
Accommodate them.
identify language that would make it possible.
yeah,
Right.
Hopefully that will work for
tell them they can
the parents.
act accordingly.
If not,
Mhm.
I'd prefer not to vote on a policy change without having the language in front of us.
Interestingly enough, there's nothing preventing them from just going through the policy as if full tuition were being paid. We're not billing them until next school year anyway. And then if that doesn't happen properly, for some reason, I wouldn't, you know what I'm saying? They can go through it, and then in July, when we say, oh, we're going to waive the tuition, there's no issue, there's no reason they can't do the screening and whatnot now. Because
It's
there's,
assuming the parents are not terribly uncomfortable with that.
right, as long as they're comfortable with that. I mean, because their worst case scenario is it falls through and they're just back to where they are now.
Right, but
A month further down the road where they could have been
enrolling in other
identifying and
programs.
establishing
Oh, that's
relationships with a
true.
different school.
That's true. If they were that dead set against wherever, Fisher Mitchell or whatever.
I'm gonna make a motion that we table, policy JFAB and seek, advice from our attorney on language that would allow us to meet the board's consensus.
Okay,
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Brings us to 9.3.2, policy JLCD, medication policy.
So you're still gonna pass that on to the two families?
What would I be passing
I
on?
don't know, that's the thing. I'd like them to know what's going on.
I think we would report that we voted to I don't remember the exact language of the motion we voted on 9.1.
It was to explore accommodating siblings of current school choice students. But passing on that exploration doesn't,
No, and then, well, and the tabling was just so that we can solidify the language that we had just expressed. I mean, you could pass that on, right?
We didn't vote on that.
No, we voted to table
Right, but we didn't vote on any language
with
changes.
context.
The discussion is recorded in
I
both
just,
the
I'm
minutes
just worried that
and
they,
on video.
I just want to do right
I
by,
think it
you
speaks
know,
for itself.
I'd hate to be too late to the game and have already alienated the two families in question, when it sounds like our intent is to try to accommodate.
I agree with what our intent sounds. I think if you review the recording and the minutes,
I'm not talking about the
a
minutes.
firm understanding of where the board wants to go, but we have not voted to change our policy.
You're right, we
yet.
haven't voted to change our policy yet, but
Policy JLCD, medication policy.
I need some now. Okay.
Want to give us the rundown on this, Bob?
Excuse me. Actually, there are three policies. The first one is the medication policy, and then we'll get first reading of policies on medication administration on school field trips and authorization to administer medication. So this is the master, if you want, which is that. This all comes about because the state basically has issued some guidelines, if you want, actually has authorized guidelines to be formulated having to do with collaborative practice agreements, which basically is a permission to administer medication. They have 10 pages on the whole thing. I don't see that anything is added over and above what we currently have, with the exception of the two new policies that will flesh out. We're just calling it, we're not calling it a collaborative practice agreement. We're saying that the doctor has to fill out a form and approve any medication that is administered, and that includes in school, on field trips, wherever else. The only thing that presumably would be required is that once new policies are passed or approved, that we would reference at the bottom of this that JLCDE and JLCDF at that time. Right now, they're not approved policies, so we can't reference them. The real reason why this is back again is a permission form. The medication authorization form is completed and signed by the parents. We talked about that. We knew that we had one, but there is no documentation in our policies, any of that, as to what the heck that form actually looks like. Okay, and so I don't really see any need to change this, with the exception of adding the references once the other policies are approved.
Do you want to look at, under Roman numeral number 2, about medication, and any person administering medication in the district will comply with the following?
Yeah, one of the issues, which has to do with the field trip policy down there, is that we do have once a year students go to Boston. And if you strictly read, the way I read this policy, it says that you have to be within the district to, for this policy to apply. And so I guess there's some debate as to what that means. And one way to get around it is rephrase in the district, or at least to clarify what that means.
Or just strike in the district to begin with?
Well, yeah, I mean, that would,
Well, it already
As
says
far as I'm
IE
concerned, that
school
would do
days,
it.
comma, field trips. The field trips,
but most field trips are in the district.
Well, no, because the
No.
district is just West Bath, so most
Yeah.
are out. And I read it as that really it's anyone who works within the district has to follow the policy, but I don't think it's even necessary language, we could just take out
Yeah.
in the district,
Well,
So,
or any employee administering
yeah,
medication.
I would suggest we change it to any district employee
Mhm.
administering medication.
then cross out in the district, any district employee administering medication
Will comply.
will comply.
I think we probably could add the cross-references, because we have other policies where the cross-references aren't fully in place, but, or we can bring it back next month and add some then,
Yeah.
whichever you prefer.
Yeah.
I will make a motion that we amend policy JLCD, bullet point 2, to read any district employee administering medication.
Will
Remainder
comply
of
with
the
the
text to
following.
stay in place, and I would, and also add cross-reference JLCDE and JLCDF.
I second.
Discussion?
None.
All in favor? Brings us to new business, 10.1, confirmation of audit services.
Okay, so I included, when I sent out items for your board packet, that this confirmation of audit service letter from our auditor, William H. Brewer. And what this does is provides the scope of the audit services for this fiscal year. He states that we'll audit the financial statements of the governmental activities, the business type activities, and each major fund, including the related notes to financial statements, which collectively comprise the basic financial statements of the West Bath SAU as of and for the years ended June 30th, 2017 and 16. And so then the following pages outline what that all looks like. And if the board desires that desires to approve this agreement, then I will sign the confirmation on the board's behalf.
And if I can't point to the particular line yet, but when I read it the first time, if I assume that the billing is to be on a case of per person, per hour, going over the books to prepare the audit, is that correct? There's no amount, for instance, that's,
For the audit?
Yeah.
I do have an amount for the audit. It was what we budgeted for the next fiscal year. I can
Okay.
look that up.
that doesn't the, maybe I got it wrong, but doesn't
No,
the
it-
language?
It's on the
ta-
bottom of
It
this
does, it's on the
page.
bottom of the second
Down
page.
there. Oh, yeah. Based on the time required by the individuals.
So the cost of what they have given us for the audit for next year, or
Hmm.
for this current year, that we pay it for next year, is $7,900.
Yay.
Make a motion, we approve and authorize the superintendent to sign on our behalf.
Second.
All in favor? Unanimous. 10.2, request to provide authority to the superintendent to transfer 5% of funds within fiscal year 2017 budget.
So we've had this conversation throughout the school year, mostly in regards to special education, and knowing that we have the right to be able to move 5% of our cost center, of a cost center to cover over expenditures in another cost center. So in conversations with the auditors, they suggested that we vote on this now, so that when the fiscal year ends in June 30th, that I would have the authority to make those changes and then report on those changes in July. Currently, when I look at our cost centers, it does not appear that any of them are going to be over expended that 5%, but this gives us that ability to make those changes if need be.
So I move that we approve that request.
Second.
Motion and a second, all in
Second.
favor? Unanimous. 10.3, personnel items, 10.3.1, nomination of Sarah Hellman, 50% special ed director.
Hey, I have to apologize, in my board packet, I put it the next 2 pages in, so you might have to flip
Yeah.
through the resignations to see the nomination of Sarah Hillman. As you know, throughout the budget process, we decided that there was a need for this position. It's a 50% special education director that would work K through 12. We approved the job description last month. The position, while 50% is 50% of the school year, so that is how the salary was determined. So interviews have taken place. Sarah has 11 years of experience of West Bath School psychological examiner and behavior consultant. This year she's been our assistant special education director for grades 6 through 12, and it's been just the most incredible support for me, for our students, for our families. And it's been wonderful to be able to say to families as we transition all of our fifth graders out that you still have the support of our special ed director and our school moving forward through your IP process. So she has strong content knowledge and practices in positive behavior supports, executive functioning, social skills, mindfulness, self-regulation, and response to intervention. Recommendations expressed that she's helpful and collaborative. She offers workshops to support current needs, extremely knowledgeable, always willing to work as part of a team to benefit students, and brings a great deal of resources and understanding of student learning to the team. And the salary for the position is listed below.
I would move that we approve the nomination.
Second.
It's been made and seconded. All in favor? That is unanimous. 10.4.1.
These are not action items, but they're for your information that we have had 2 resignations. The first is for one full-time special education, special ed tech 2, Deb Barnes. She's been working in our district off and on for 5 years, but if you look at her experience of the overall RSU, it's been many more than that. She is expressing that she is moving to, changing states, moving to Mississippi, and you can see in her,
She can't commute?
she's not going to commute.
Unwilling to commute, I'm sorry.
So the other resignation is from Mary Wallace, who is a 50% ed tech, and part of her position is also doing special education secretarial work. She has resigned because she has an opportunity for a full-time position with United Way. And you can see their words within their letters.
Board
He's
accepts
going
those,
to provide challenges to replace,
Say that again?
or is this going to provide large or small challenge to replace?
It's always a challenge to replace faculty who have been a part of your community and who know our students and our practices and have developed through professional development with us. But I think that both of them have opportunities that they're very excited about. We have posted for one position, the one full-time position, and that gives us a little bit of time to bring in the special ed director, have her get a sense of how things are working, what needs she currently has before we decide whether the next position needs to be reposted. It also allows our kindergartners to come in and for us to know who we have in front of us.
Board accepts those resignations with regret. Thank both of them for their time and wish them well in their future endeavors. 10.5.1, elementary school lunch increase from $2.55 to $2.65.
So you may recall from our food service review last year that we are required to meet the current federal requirement for the cost of a school lunch. And so currently the federal requirement is $2.86. The reason we're required to meet that is because they want to make sure that students who are paying full price for school lunch are paying as much as what subsidy we're receiving for those who are not paying. And so it's an equity fairness issue. And we have to use something called a price equity tool to calculate what our increases must be each year. So last year we raised our lunch from $2.45 to $2.55 as part of the price equity tool determination. And looking at that tool, we need to, in order to be able to meet federal requirements, raise it to $2.67. However, state rules also say you can't raise more than 10 cents a year, which make our meal prices needing to be raised to $2.65 per full cost meal. However, I also want to present an alternative for the board to discuss and think about. So we can raise our food service price by 10 cents for a full cost meal, $2.55 to $2.65. Or alternatively, we can raise $702.30 ourselves. That would keep the school lunch rates at $2.55 for another year. And the way that figure is calculated through the price equity tool is they look at the 15-16, the number of full school lunches that were purchased in 15-16, which was 7,023, and this is 10% of that number, gives us the $702.30. If we want to raise that, what we need to say is that we are designating $702.30 from the funds we've raised at town meeting, which is 35,000, to offset lunch prices and keep them at 255 for another year. So there's two different things to consider, depending on which way you want to go, knowing of course that it might mean we're looking at raising next year instead, but I wanted to give you both options.
Would we have to doubly raise next year?
We're not allowed to raise more than 10 cents.
Oh, yeah. Right.
But we are required to meet that federal requirement. So, the goal is always gonna be that we need to meet
Mhm.
what the subsidy is.
I assume that $702.30 would not be an undue burden on the school. Is that a good assumption?
I would love to say that because we've increased by 5,000, that we probably could make that work. But you know that food service numbers are still foggy.
I have a question though, what that means. So if we don't, but the 702 would take the place of raising.
Right, we would
So
keep
then-
food service at
okay, so
255
that-
for another year.
So then next year. Okay. Sorry.
I personally would like to avoid raising it. And the reason is we've had ongoing discussions about eventually, let's say, providing meals without charge to students. So if this is in our long-term thought process, it would make some sense to me to assume the additional expense, at least at the time, and not raise the cost of the lunch to the students and their families.
Other thoughts? Was that a motion?
I will make a motion, which is to maintain the cost of school lunch at $2.55 for the next school year.
So our motion has to also say that we are designated $702.
Yes, and we will designate $702.30 to offset the federal requirement, I guess it is.
So I believe the motion is we will keep the lunch prices at $2.55 and designate $702.30 from the 35,000 raised town meeting for food service.
I will second that motion.
Discussion?
No.
All in favor? It is unanimous.
My devil's advocate had left the building on that one.
10.6.1, first reading of policy JLCDE, medication administration on school field trips.
All right, any unlicensed personnel administering medications must hold documentation of their training and the administration of medication, including personnel administering medication on a field trip. There must be written permission from the parent guardian providing consent to administer the medication in school, and a written physician's order and/or appropriately labeled original medication container. Either a standardized pre-printed medication label or pre-printed envelope containing the information described below, or a medication in its original container, will be used for students attending a field trip. When a pre-printed label or pre-printed envelope, when using a pre-printed label or envelope, the school nurse shall transfer the prescribed amount of medication needed for the field trip from the original container into the approved envelope and fill in the appropriate information on the envelope. The envelope will be provided to the trained personnel for administration during the trip. The school nurse will provide a review of the medication and its administration to the trained personnel on an as-needed basis. All trained personnel administering medication must understand what to do in an emergency. The medication will be transported and stored in compliance with any special directions for the medication and will be secured as safely as possible. Medication will be administered to the student to ensure the right student receives the right medication with the right dose at the right time by the right route. The trained personnel administering the medication will double-check the student with the medication label and will double-check the dose. The medication will be given within 30 minutes either side of the prescribed time. Each school district will develop a method of documenting medications administered on the field trip, recording any unexpected occurrences, and a method of returning any medication not administered. The medication envelope or label will contain the following information: date to be administered, name of the student, name of the medication, dose to be given, time to be given, physician prescribing the medication, special directions, phone number of the school nurse, and emergency directions. And that should reference JLCD policy and JLCDF.
My only question is on number 8 with just the language of each school district will develop.
They just say the school district or the district.
Right. Something along those lines.
And this, as I recall, is mandated by the state.
Yep.
It's in line with what's
Um,
already in place.
There probably are some legal references which are, rather than mention those, let me pass that along. Should be considered in any event.
We can certainly
That
add
was
those
from
and
the-
cross references for second reading.
Mhm.
Any other discussion on first reading? First reading of policy JLCDF, authorization to administer medication.
And if you don't mind, I will, other than say that we need to both reference JLCDE and JLCD and identify that this document is JLCDF at the top. If you don't mind, I will skip down through the top, which does describe specifically all of the, really all of the specifying things that we had before, and get down to West Bath School Policy. Medication shall be administered at school only when the student's health requires the medication be given during school hours. Prescription medications that are administered at school must be in prescription bottle. Written authorization from the student's parent, guardian, and a physician is required. We cannot accept medications in plastic bags or envelopes. In some cases, emergency epinephrine and inhaler medication may be kept with a student. The student must demonstrate sufficient knowledge, skills, and judgment to carry and use to the school nurse. Supplying medication. All medicine, including over-the-counter medicine, must be supplied in the original container. Ask your pharmacist for any prescription medication to be divided into 2 bottles, completely labeled, one for home and one for school. Parent guardian is responsible for refills and bringing medication to school. Please contact the school nurse to check on the amount to be supplied to the school. Medication removal. I understand that I must remove medication from school at the end of the school year or the last day of the student's enrollment. I understand that if the medication is still in school 7 days after the last student day, the medication will be disposed of. Permission to contact prescribing physician. I give my permission for the school nurse to contact the above prescribing physician to obtain information about the medication and the administering schedule. I give my permission for the school nurse to share information with the doctor about the effects of the medication on my school's learning. I understand that any staff member who is the principal's designee may administer the above medication. This may include a school nurse or a medically unlicensed person designated by the principal as allowed by law, and a place for the printed name and signature of the parent, their telephone, and date.
Any feedback on policy JLCDF?
Nope.
Yeah, I'm gonna adjust the agenda and bring us, bring public comment up before the executive session. Any member of the public wish to address the board? Absolutely.
My name is Camille Coppinger. I'm one of the 2 families that's affected by the sibling grandfathering situation. So I'm regretting a little bit I didn't take Patrick's lead and just get my hand up a little quicker. perhaps before you're voting, I most importantly want to thank you for taking time to focus on this issue. The superintendent's agreement and the appeal process have been frustrating, and has felt difficult and somewhat unsupportive. So to come here, I mean, I've had Emily's support, but to come here and hear that it sounds like overall, there's no argument that, we have care concerns for those families, that have siblings that weren't taken care of with the withdrawal agreement. So I do hear your overall support, and desire to address that policy to make it possible. But I do wanna just stress that it does feel very time sensitive, at least, I think for both of our families that have asked for agreements this year. I've got an appointment next week with Woolwich School just to sort of be able to establish their numbers and some sense of security that if this doesn't happen, that as an Aroustic family without a school, that I will know with certainty that my kids have my next best choice, so that they can join the rest, most of the Aroustic children that are in elementary school at Woolwich. So that's a decision that I'm gonna need to make very quickly, and also feel concerned that Ren in third grade has a chance to know and go through a transition process and prepare for leaving the school if for some reason this were to fall through. So I do hear your overall support that the focus seems to be on just figuring out the right language and that you do want to make it happen, but I'll certainly, be looking to Emily or Keith to have that sense of security that there is no risk that if I don't enroll next week in Woolwich School, that, Ren and Stella, my daughter, will have a place here. And so that's just felt like a very vulnerable kind of place to be, to not have that security and be able to, settle my family to know what we're doing. So I just want to put that out there. I guess I'm really going to be looking for the confidence that what was voted on today or discussed today or tabled today was that, yes, we want to move forward with, providing a school to those siblings. We just need to know exactly what words to use to do it. But I really appreciate that there is an overall sense of support, and that wasn't what the discussion was tonight, whether to support or not support. It seems to be just how to do it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate the position you're in as well. I'm gonna make a motion, we enter into executive session pursuant to Title I, Chapter 13, Section 4056D of the MRSA for the purpose of discussing labor contracts between the West Bath SAU and the WBEA.
A second.
All in favor? That is unanimous. Okay, we're back in regular session.
All right.
Leave
You
you
want me
have a
to-
question?
Yeah, I was just thought it might be a nice idea if we added an archive of our newsletter that goes out bi-weekly. Bi-weekly? Weekly. See, I only get half of them. That goes out weekly to our school website for reference throughout the year.
We certainly can do that. That is not currently in place, but all of the items that are listed on the newsletter are also listed on our website. So you can see them all within the calendar, you can see them within the newsletter, and so they're also typically listed on our Facebook page, but we certainly can also put links to the newsletters that go out by email.
Yep.
And also, I would just recommend if you're not getting your newsletter, to contact the school so that we can assist you in getting your newsletter.
I have one question, which is anyone watching these videos?
I haven't looked.
Our next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, July 12th at 6:30 here at the West Bath School. And I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I would like to move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Can we do that again?